Welcome, everyone. This is Attorney Candice Carr with Ouellette Carr and Spectrum Title Services. Thank you for watching this quick video. And today we are going to go over the buyer's closing documents. So these are going to be the documents that we as the title company prepare and have a buyer sign at closing. This does not include a HUD or closing statement, and this does not include obviously all of their lender's documents. These are just our title company documents that we have them sign our standard forms on every closing. Okay, so let's start out with a closing statement addendum. And this actually is a form that both buyer and seller sign. But we're just going to talk about it in terms of the buyer's side today. Okay, so the first part of this form is a tax reproration agreement. This says if the most recent property tax bill issued does not cover through the closing date, then the prorations set forth on the settlement statement or the HUD are based on an estimate, which we use the previous year if we don't have the current year available. The basis of the proration as set forth on the HUD is accepted by the parties. It is hereby understood that if the actual taxes, if different, will be adjusted between the parties upon demand. Closing agent is not liable or responsible for adjustment or reproration of taxes. So if either side comes to us after closing and says the taxes were very different, we would like an adjustment, we attempt to resolve it with both sides. However, we are not responsible for paying anybody any different. Well, all we can do is put the parties together and hopefully they can work it out amongst themselves. Agreement to cooperate. If requested by the lender or by ourselves as the closing agent to re-sign a document because of a clerical error, the buyer agrees to cooperate in doing that. Homeowner or condominium association. This obviously will only apply if the property is in an association and the buyer acknowledges the existence of one and is aware that there are maintenance assessments that may be due and that the association has the authority to enforce certain standards. Okay. Miscellaneous. This states that we as the closing agent do not make any representations or warranties as to the condition of the property. We don't know anything about the condition of the property and we're not advising as to that. Disbursement authorization. This essentially says that the buyer gives us the authority to make all the disbursements that are set forth on the closing statement. So we've listed everything on there, all the monies that will be paid and who they will be paid to, and the buyer will sign the closing statement as well. And then they'll also sign this stating that they give us the authority to make all those disbursements. Okay, so that's the closing statement addendum. Now the next form is a closing affidavit for the buyer. The seller will have their own affidavit. And this states that Jane Doe is purchasing following property from John Smith. We'll have the legal description there. This states that the buyer's marital status is as reflected in the affidavit or in other documents. It's important for us to know if the buyer is single or married, especially when it comes to their loan documents, stating that the buyer is of legal age and they've not been adjudicated incompetent, that there are no matters pending against the buyer that could potentially create a lien on the property that will be recorded prior to our warranty deed and the mortgage, and that the buyer will not execute any documents that could potentially affect the title to the property. To the best of the buyer's knowledge and information, there have not been any work done on the property in the past 90 days, that there are no mechanics liens or potential mechanics liens. This is to make sure that there's not going to be any notices of commencement that might get recorded the day of closing, and our search will not necessarily have that information. So this is stating that the buyer has not begun any work on the property and they're not aware of anything that could potentially create a lien. That the buyer knows of no violations on the property. They don't have any tax liens or judgments or anything that could potentially create a lien on the property. And we obviously have our title search. The title search only runs up to a certain point. It won't run up through the day of closing until after the closing. And I'm going to do another video on title insurance and title commitment, and I'll talk a little bit more about how the search works. And a lot of times we'll get some pushback from buyers on this document, and they'll say, well, how in the world am I supposed to know if there's any liens on the property? Well, this is what you're signing this document. You're saying that you are not aware of any liens on the property and that you have no judgments or tax liens that we're not aware of that could potentially cloud the title and could potentially be recorded prior to our deed. I mean, by signing this, a buyer is not saying that there are no liens, period. This is to the best of their knowledge. Okay, there are no actions proceeding in any courts, any bankruptcies, etc. So anything that could cause an issue, excuse me, to the title, we're asking them to state that they are not aware of that. Okay, and this affidavit is given for the purpose of clearing any objections to title and to induce ourselves, Spectrum Title Services, and our underwriter, Old Republic, to issue a title insurance policy. Okay, the buyer holds ourselves and our underwriter harmless and indemnifies us and them if the buyer is lying. If they have knowledge of something that's an issue and they fail to bring it to our attention and they sign this affidavit. This affidavit does need to be notarized, and it is being signed under oath. Now, number 9 here we have as a notice to buyers and to sellers on their affidavit that we do not hold water escrow. I know there are some title companies that still do hold water escrow until that final bill comes in. We do not do that. We collect the water based on the last estoppel letter that we receive, and if there's any balance due, we collect that, but we do not hold any escrow pending a final bill. So any final bills will need to be, if there's a dispute as to a final bill, that will need to be handled between the parties. And we always try and work with everybody. Very rarely is this ever an issue, but if it is, we do what we can to get it resolved. Okay, financial responsibility. Buyer and seller realize that there's a possibility that the computer makes an error. There's a clerical error when putting together a closing statement. And again, both sides agree to cooperate if we need to make a change. So this will be signed and notarized, and that's the buyer's closing affidavit. The next form, this form we have a buyer sign if they are paying cash and they choose to not get a survey. Okay, if they're getting a loan, we automatically order a survey, there's no question. If they're paying cash, they're not required to get a survey. So if they don't want one, then they sign this form stating that they've elected to close without a survey, and we are not responsible for any issues that may have been disclosed by one. Pretty straightforward. Okay, the next form is a survey waiver and acknowledgement. And this states that there is a survey and that there are certain exceptions potentially that may appear on the final policy. Okay, if there's anything, if there are any easements or encroachments or something to that effect, that information will be filled in this section here, and the buyer will sign it saying that they've received a copy of it and then they've been made aware of any potential encroachments on that are shown by the survey. Okay, the next one is an errors and omissions or compliance agreement. If the buyer is getting a loan, the lender will have their own errors and omissions form. We also have this one signed by both buyer and seller, and it is essentially an agreement to cooperate, like we previously discussed. If there's a lot of times with lenders, they'll forget to include a certain document in their loan package, and 3 days after closing they say, oh, we need this document signed. Well, it's on us to get the buyer to sign that additional document. So both sides are going to sign, agreeing to cooperate if we need them to re-sign something or to provide something after closing. Okay, and the final buyer document is a building and zoning code compliance and a hold harmless agreement. And what this says is that we order a lien search, and despite the fact that many title companies do not include permit searches, because, and we've talked about this in a previous video, permits are not title issues. Open permits, expired permits, they are not title issues. We do not have a duty to even search them. However, we, as part of our standard lien search, order permit searches. So this form is stating that we have ordered a lien search. If there's something that has not been revealed on that lien search or has not come up on our title search, that we have no way of knowing. So if there is an expired permit and for whatever reason it doesn't come up on searches, zoning violations that don't come up on the searches, we as the title company have no other way of obtaining this information. So this states that we've done these searches. If there is a permit or a zoning case that comes up, we do fill that in here. So it's saying that we've not assumed any duty to perform the searches. However, it has come to our attention that this exists. So if it's NA, then nothing has come to our attention, but we will include that here. However, we are not responsible if something comes up that we were not aware of. Okay? So those are just the buyer's documents. Again, on all of our closings, that we have them sign in addition to the HUD and their lender's documents. So we hope this video will be helpful to buyers. We'll add it to our buyer playlist, and that way they can see some of the documents that they'll be signing prior to closing, and if they have any questions they can contact myself, and I'm happy to answer them. So we look forward to working with you all on your next closing. Take care.